What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. My name is Kyle. It's been a while. I have not done a video for probably about a month here. And this is usually what I like to do. I like to take some time off after the fantasy football season and just take it easy. It's, a gauntlet, basically, this fantasy football season and content schedule. Basically just doing videos from kind of August all the way through December here. So we took a break off, which was nice. Happy New Year 2026, the first video of 2026 for me. So that's pretty cool. In this video, we're going to talk about the lessons from the 2025 fantasy football season. I'll kind of share. I have an article here on the fantasyfellowship.com that I'm going to go over with you guys. And there's a bunch of stuff on there that I've been kind of tweaking the website and getting some things rolled over to 2026. I have the free agency tracker up there. I have some 2026 draft prospect consensus rankings. And then I did upload the fantasy data that we need to be looking at. And I do have a dynasty update coming in February 1st. We're going to be looking at that. And then February, I'm going to be releasing a advanced data study that will be just looking at everything from 2025, from passing, receivers, and running. We're going to take a look at the fantasy positions and just learn some things from the advanced data. So that's coming in February. March, I'm just starting my 2026 NFL draft research. I actually have collected all my data and I'm starting to kind of go through and watch tape and film and fun stuff like that. So we're getting into the swing of things. This is one of my favorite times of the year. It's a chance to slow down and actually just start kind of observing the new rookie class coming in, as well as taking a peek at, I don't know, just everything that happened last year. And that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to look at the lessons from 2025. And this is available on the fantasyfellowship.com for free. If you guys want to check it out, just hover over the content tab and it'll be there. I'm going to start rolling out some articles for the membership stuff and just some free articles and things like that. So more stuff is coming. But let's talk about, and I think I have 5 lessons in here. Man, late round quarterbacks seem to dominate. And let me actually I got to pull up some stuff here because I just want to show you guys what we're looking at when I'm talking through some of this stuff. I'm going to go to I'm going to pull up the DraftKings ADP and then we'll take a look at, actually, I might have it on the fantasyfellowship.com. Let's go to passing stats. Alrighty. So your fantasy points. Where are we here? Matthew Stafford. I'm going to go to FF today real quick. All right. So we have the passing stats up. Let me actually go to ESPN fantasy stats here. So, alrighty. So my lesson learned from 2025 is that late round QBs were technically the way to go. You look at the top 5, look at the top 10 here. We're talking Josh Allen, who of course was the first quarterback taken in most fantasy drafts in 2025, but Matthew Stafford was probably not drafted in your 1 QB league. Drake May might not have been drafted in your 1 QB league. Trevor Lawrence wasn't drafted. Dak Prescott was probably, QB 6 to 10 in that range. But that's a good value hit there. Caleb Williams might not have been drafted in your 1 QB league. And then there's Jalen Hurts, who was kind of like QB 2 or 3, Goff, Nix, Herbert. So like in the top 10, only Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts returned value on being top 10. And I actually kind of talk about that here. You guys can, again, I'm going to probably link this in the comments after the video, but only Josh Allen finished as a top 5 QB and had a top 5 ADP. We did see other quarterbacks here. Let me go all the way. This is the ADP on from DraftKings, which I think is pretty good for best ball ADP. But I mean, Josh Allen was QB1, Lamar injury plagued season, Jaden Daniels injury plagued season, Jalen Hurts underperformed, Joe Burrow hurt, Patrick Mahomes hurt, Baker Mayfield underperformed. Bo Nix kind of paid off his ADP. So did Dak Prescott. Kyler Murray completely disappeared. Brock Purdy just hanging out, man. getting hurt, but he played really well when he was out there. Jared Goff outperformed. Justin Fields dudded, but Caleb Williams, Drake May, Herbert, like that was a nice little pocket there. Jordan Love was good when he was out there. Trevor Lawrence was great down the stretch. And then you have Matthew Stafford and Sam Darnold all the way down here. So to me, and I kind of talk about this in the lessons here, and this has been a philosophy of mine for honestly the last few years. And I do this a lot when we're doing our mock drafts in the summer. And it's like, I think the opportunity, if you're going to spend a top 5 ADP on a QB, say you take the QB3, he needs to finish as a top 3, top 4 QB for me to feel like I got that pick right. Whereas if I identify a quarterback that I think could be a top 5, top 10 QB, and for me, those guys were Dak Prescott and Drake May and Trevor Lawrence even. There's a lot of guys that I liked later that I'm like, they have more opportunity to go up in the standings than to hurt me going down. So for quarterbacks, that's just one of my philosophies here. So you guys can check out that. But that was my first lesson. And I noted again. So this kind of confirms something that I had been doing of late here. So I like waiting for QBs. And if you guys like waiting for QBs, I also like waiting to draft tight ends. Let's take a pull here at the ADP from the tight ends. And I guess my lesson here is very similar to quarterback because these are just one positions. You start one QB, one tight end. Obviously, if you play in a super flex or a tight end premium league, you might start 2 of those players. But for the most part, you're starting one tight end. And I hate the tight end position. It's really hard for them to compete value-wise based on where they're being drafted. So these are your top tight ends from ADP in 2025. Brock Bowers, injury-plagued season, but he was also on the worst team in the league. If you spent a second-round pick on Brock Bowers, you probably didn't have a lot of success in fantasy football this year. The one guy who's going to probably trump everything that we're going to talk about here is Trey McBride, just because he was so damn good in 2025. And it took him a little while. I think Jacoby Brissett truly unlocked him and made him as good of a fantasy player as he was in 2025. But McBride, if you drafted him, he is the one guy that I think kind of debunks everything. And it's hard to find those unicorns. The last few years, we've seen some unicorns at tight end. But traditionally, I don't like paying second, third, fourth round prices on tight end. You can see Trey McBride here was the tight end one, and he scored 105 more points than Kyle Pitts. And everybody else after that, to me, was just kind of the same. The difference between Kyle Pitts and Juwan Johnson is about 20, 25 points. That's maybe 2-3 points per game at most. So if you hit the unicorn, yeah, you did what you're supposed to do. But for the most part, we're looking at the ADP again here. Like Bowers, that sunk your season. George Kittle probably sunk your season. Sam Laporta sunk your season. Tyler Warren was a hit. Travis Kelce ended up performing fine. TJ Hawkinson, Ingram, Andrews, Njoku, these guys all kind of stunk. Colston Loveland did kind of come back around. And hey, if you drafted Tucker Kraft in 2025, you were probably feeling pretty good about what you had for a bit there. And then obviously Kyle Pitts, had a nice end of the season. Jake Ferguson had a nice season. Dalton Kincaid, he was actually at the top of a lot of my metrics when I was doing my advanced data study. So he looks good. But yeah, the point is, I'd like to try and take a tight end that I think, has a chance to start my season and see how it goes, especially in redraft. I like to get a guy that I'm like, if everything breaks right and he comes out the gate hot, I feel good about it. That was Kyle Pitts for me this year. I didn't find myself drafting a lot of Tyler Warren. I did like Colston Loveland, though, too. He was another guy that I liked going on with. But I guess the main idea here is with waiting with tight ends, the reason is because I like loading up at running back receiver in rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's kind of the sweet spot to grab some of the best players of your team. And just looking at the data from last year, Bowers cost a second rounder. McBride and Kittle were third rounders. Then there was a dip to Laporta, who was, back end 5th, 6th round, Warren in the 7th. 7th, 8th round, I'm open to taking some of these guys, but you also have a lot of junk here too with Hawkinson, Ingram, and Andrews. So knowing when to pull tight end, I think is extremely important. Yeah, I want to get the unicorn, but sometimes I just prefer waiting on tight end and basically, waiting on the season, because you can find guys like Harold Fannin off the waiver wire. You can find Jake Ferguson's and Jawan Johnson's off the waiver wire and just kind of make that position work for you along the way. So to me, that's how I like doing it. I will continue to say wait to draft tight ends. Obviously, McBride and Bowers and probably a couple other guys are going to be highly ranked this year. So we'll see how that goes. But that was the lesson I learned in 2025. The third lesson here is going to be just something that we continue to do and know and have practiced, and it's continue to pass up aging in mid-round running backs. Now, here's the list of running backs that were being drafted in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7. It was Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, RJ Harvey, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Isaiah Pacheco, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, Tyrone Traskey, and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Now, none of these guys were league winners. I think Harvey, if you had the patience, he ended up paying off for you pretty nicely. I think DeAndre Swift was probably the biggest hit out of this group, and Kenneth Walker was pretty frustrating to own on a week-to-week basis. But DeAndre Swift was solid. But I guess the point is the hit rate here was really, really bad. So, again, this kind of enforces the ideas that we've talked about in the first two notes here, that I like getting running backs earlier in my draft, rounds 1, 2, and 3, because we get to this land of uncertainty. And yeah, there's some aging guys here: Kamara, Connor, Pollard, even Montgomery, Aaron Jones. Like, those guys are generally not high players on my draft board. So continue to fade aging backs. But again, the idea is you want to invest early in running back and then circle back late, because here's a list of running backs drafted 8th round or greater. And if you had these guys, you probably enjoyed having them on your team this season. That was Jaylen Warren. That was probably Zach Charbonnet, Travis Etienne. Javonte Williams was the absolute stud late round pick this year. I guess Quinshon Judkins was pretty good as well. Scatabo looked like he was going to shatter everything. Ramondre Stevenson came on strong down the stretch. Rico Dowdle came out of nowhere and just took over that backfield. Woody Marks was a good find. Rashad White was solid while Bucky Irving was hurt. And then Kyle Monangai put together a really nice season. So, again, it's easy to say all this now that the season's over and just looking at the landscape and how things fell, but passing up on those ugly middle round running backs. And sure, you could have maybe pulled Harvey from that group and then just continued, the rest of the way. I still think you want to maybe take a pull at a running back here. I'm not saying to not draft a running back in the middle rounds, but we have to be wise. I think youth is on your side. You want to be looking for those Harveys, and maybe the Breece and the Walker would have been fine. Not a terrible value, but they just weren't hits. So just another note there. Continue drafting wide receivers in their prime is the fourth note. It seems kind of obvious, but we're going to have fun continuing to draft young receivers. And hey, good evening to Harris, my guy. I hope you're doing well. Long time no see. And Ja'Cory was all over the ADPs based on whatever platform, especially if it was half PPR, non-PPR. But DraftKings and Best Balls, he was getting steamed up pretty high. I think, 8th, 9th, 10th round was kind of where he was going. But it kind of proved out to not be a good pick. As Washington season just kind of swirled down the drain. But the fourth point here is I just want to keep drafting young players, wide receivers especially, age 22 to 27. 10 of the top 12 fantasy receivers last year were under the age of 27. The outliers were Devontae Adams with his 14 touchdowns, and then A.J. Brown. Only 3 receivers that were drafted in the first round ended up finishing as top 12 fantasy wide receivers, which I thought was interesting. The second round only provided 2 wide receivers that ended up performing well. And it appears that 2025 was the year of the early running back. So like if you started your draft with 2 running backs, you probably had a good time, especially if you came back and you hit on any of these guys. Like if you hit on Jackson Smith and the Jigba, George Pickens, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, these guys were engines for your fantasy team. And again, if you started, I mean, there was a draft where I had Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor, and then I came back with Jackson Smith, the Jigba. I also had a couple other big hits throughout that draft, but lining that up and hitting on some of these younger receivers who we know they're good, and yet we continue to pass up on them. I think that's a lesson that I got to continue to itch on. Is it almost doesn't matter who they are. If you're a young receiver and you're kind of the number one, like that's kind of what I talk about here. If you're the de facto wide receiver one on your team, we're going to like having you on our fantasy teams. And that's where you can find some of these breakouts. Like these guys all pretty much broke out in 2025 in their own way. So the idea is to continue drafting these young stud receivers. I don't really like gambling on players that are, again, in their same thing about the running backs. I don't really like gambling on players who are past their prime, hoping that they can get this Devontae Adams touchdown season, even if it's okay to add some of that to your profile. But I try to focus on these young second, third, fourth, fifth year players who are, trying to put up their best fantasy season so far. First and second year receivers should also continue to be drafted, although we just didn't see any elite rookie seasons posted in 2025. We did see solid numbers from Ted McMillan, but they were kind of inconsistent to say the least throughout the year. He did end up finishing as wide receiver 15. You also had, where is he? Emeka Egbuka started off so hot, but he tailed off late. I still want to continue to draft rookies, but I think year two receivers, year three receivers, those I want to have like I want at least 2 or 3 of those guys on my teams every year. And especially guys that are, fourth year, fifth year, kind of entering that next contract phase. That's where you see a lot of these guys up here at the top start to make their names. Any other notes here on those wide receivers? It was weird. We saw a lot of year two receivers actually drop off. Marvin Harrison starting to lose some confidence in him. Obviously, the Malik Neighbors injury hurt. But Romo Dunze started off hot with touchdowns. He gets injured and didn't really have a nice end of the season. Brian Thomas was a total bust. Xavier Worthy was a huge bust. Ricky Pearsall pretty much banged up with that knee injury. And then Ladd McConkey just didn't pay off ADP. So these guys are probably going to be ideal candidates for bounce backs in 2026. So we'll talk about that. But I still think the archetype is, is this receiver the number one receiver on his team? And is he in this age window of 22 to 27-ish? I'm probably going to want him on my team just because I think the range of outcomes are pretty good for that guy. Okay. And then last but not least this is just the lesson that I think hurt the most. And it's something that I should have knew better. But when you do as many best ball drafts and as many mock drafts and you do all this research and you have a website and you put all this stuff together, and then you get to your final draft, which is like your big home draft, and you just kind of force some things. And it's like, I want this to work so bad, and I think I'm going to look really, really smart if this pays off. And that, to me, happened when I took Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. at the 12 overall. So I started the 1-2 turn with Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. I don't hate the strategy of Nico Collins. He ended up playing pretty well as a top 10 fantasy receiver, but Brian Thomas Jr. ultimately burned me in this league because I'm passing on, running backs, CMC, Jonathan Taylor. There's a couple other ones in there. And then, of course, I did pass on Amon-Ra and Puka Nacua. So I did get too cute, which is a tough lesson here. And had I simply taken the best player, at the top of the board, balance is key. You need to maintain it and know when to take risk. I guess that's my biggest lesson is don't get too cute, because it's funny, like in other leagues that I didn't care about as much. Yeah, I had Brian Thomas Jr. ranked highly, but I stuck to taking in the fellowship league that we have here on the YouTube channel. I ended up with Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor as my first 2 picks, which ended up pretty nice season for me. So sometimes you just have to know when to just suck it up and take the best player available, make the best decision at the time, and then you can kind of build in some risk later, whether it's rookies or older players or things like that. So that was my biggest lesson to learn. Don't get too cute. And I appreciate you, Tony, in there as well. I see you, man. Good evening. Thanks for all the advice this year. I appreciate you, Tony. I appreciate you, Harris, as well. You guys are good people, and I enjoy hanging out with you guys and seeing you in the comments every time I'm doing a video. So I know it's been a while. It's been a month since I uploaded a video, but I'm ready to start kind of trickling back into the waves here. Again, I've updated some things here on the fantasyfellowship.com. You guys can check some of that stuff out. I do have a dynasty ranking update coming February 1st. So I guess this weekend I'll have that up. And then, I'll probably make a free agency video coming up here. I do have draft prospect rankings up. I've already started working on the data for the 2026 class, and I'm going through the process now of watching and starting to get through the film and learning about these new players coming in. But I'm also working on a huge 2025 NFL database study, which will highlight a lot of fun things to look at and kind of just basically just give a picture to what happened in 2025. So a lot of fun things coming. But again, this is there's not much happening in the fantasy football world. We have the Super Bowl coming up, which is going to be fun. But it's winter. Enjoy it. Try not to do anything crazy with your dynasty teams. I guess that's another lesson. Try and let that simmer down. Enjoy some downtime while we have it. So I appreciate y'all hanging out with me on was it Wednesday night here? And yeah, I got a new setup down here just on the first floor living room. So we're just hanging out here, a little bit cozier down here. But either way, guys, I appreciate y'all. Have a good rest of your night, and we'll see you soon. Peace.